Now, I hope you managed to have a go at the CAE question. Just because it says CAE doesn't mean it's necessarily harder. Exactly the same rules apply. Exactly the same language issues apply. The answers for the CAE or advanced open-close question, it's the same kind of language traps or the same language areas as in the FCE. So you're looking for the similar kind of things. You're asking yourself the same questions about sentence structure. Are the basics in place? You're recalling conjunctions, subordinate conjunctions, linkers, transitions. You're looking at conditional clauses. You're looking at active and passive, if I didn't say that already. And you're asking yourself the same questions in terms of grammar structure and in terms of sentence structure. Okay, so let's have a look at, and I'll try to explain that as we go through this, that there's nothing particularly difficult about this. The vocab might be a little bit harder, okay, but there's nothing that much more difficult about the CAE question compared to the FCE question. Okay, so we've got the example there. Stress is often called a 21st century illness. First of all, called. What's called? Called is an adjective. I am called Simon, for example, and we introduce adjectives with the verb or a form of the verb be. In this case, is. Stress is called, or stress is often called. This isn't complicated grammar. This is grammar you would have learned back when you started to learn English. My name is Simon. Exactly the same idea. This is crazy. You are crazy, etc., etc. Very simple sentence structures. The grammar doesn't suddenly go all crazy just because it's CAE. Okay, so stress is often called the 21st century illness, but it has always been with us, if perhaps with different names. These days we regard stress a necessary evil of modern living. What do we need in this gap? What we need here is a preposition which explains. So these days we regard stress, and then what follows is an explanation of why we need stress. Or if you read the article through, you get the idea of the context that stress is always there, and it causes us different problems. So the explanatory preposition that we need here is as. These days we regard stress as a necessary evil of modern living. Yet stress is not negative, and without what? Without what we would not enjoy some of the high points in life. Without stress, surely. Yet stress is not negative, and without stress, we would not enjoy some of the high points in life. But we can't say stress, because what we're looking here for is functions of language. Although it would be interesting to know if you wrote down stress, whether it would be marked correctly or incorrectly. Different question, different video. But what we need here is a form of substitution. In other words, we need to refer to stress by not calling it stress. So how can we do that? Well, we can refer to stress by calling it it. Yet stress is not negative, and without it, in other words, without stress, so I'll write down it above my head, without it, we would not enjoy some of the high points in life. Now, substitution, for some strange reason, is something that you generally see in textbooks at CAE level, which is a bit strange because substitution is something that you use right from the beginning of when you're learning English. So, for example, him, her, mine, hers, etc., etc. These are all forms of substitution. Instead of saying my brother, my brother, my brother, my brother, my brother, you would say he, and you would think of John even as a form of your brother's name as a form of substitution. You can think of lots of ways to substitute or to replace my brother in simple ways without having to have a great knowledge of English. So, given that we use substitution so early in our learning of English, why it's only taught at advanced levels, I've got absolutely no idea. Because substitution is very, very, very often appears in this open close, and it's something that you've got to watch out for as well. So these days, and without it, we would not enjoy some of the higher points in life. And now, after the gap for number 3, what we get are examples of the high points in life. So the anticipation before a date or the tension leading up to an important match. So what we need here is an expression which means the same as for example, given the structure that we've got. So we've got a gap before as. So what expression means the same as for example? The answer that we need is such. So such as the anticipation before a date. And of course, such as is a form of substitution for example. So synonyms and substitutions very, very closely linked. All these situations produce stress, but gap. You can control it and not the other way around. You will feel stimulated, not worn out. What's our answer? What we've got here in the context of the sentence is a conditional structure. You can control it and not the other way around. Okay, that as a clause stands by itself. And then afterwards, we've got you will feel stimulated, not worn out. Now, because of that additional main clause, you will feel stimulated, not worn out, it makes the clause beforehand sound a little bit strange, because we're trying to communicate what the aim of this sentence here is to try and communicate a conditional of some kind. So what we need for number 4 is a conditional form. And if you remember, we had a conditional form in the FCE exam, in the FCE question as well. So once again, this is not fantastically complicated English. It's just a question of analysing the sentence and understanding what the context is. So which conditional forms can you use here? Well, you've got 2 answers. First of all, you've got the answer which you can use in all hypothetical situations, which is if. What other conditional can we use here? All these situations produce thus, but when you can control it and not the other way around, you will feel stimulated, not worn out. Can we talk about this in terms of future certainty, given the context that we're presented with here? I'm not so sure that's the right way to go, because it rather suggests that something will happen to you, but beforehand we were given examples of things that might happen to you. So if we were to use when in this context, it would it wouldn't fit with the context which is presented beforehand. So when is not the correct answer here. Can we use whether? Well, there's no or in this situation. We're not being presented with 2 options, so we can't say whether. But there is one other that we can use, and that is provided. So provided you can control it. So provide as a collocation works with control. So provided you can control it, not the other way around, you will feel stimulated, not worn out. Worn out meaning tired. However, unlike these situations, and then we've got gap number 5, let me just scroll that up. So, however, unlike these situations, are generally positive and easier to deal with. So, and let's pay attention, as always. If you're eagle-eyed, you'll see that there are two commas, one before number 5 and one after with. So these two commas have the effect of separating this clause from the main sentence. And if we remember back to areas of grammar which require the use of commas, one area of grammar that uses commas is, of course, relative clauses and relative pronouns. So what we need here is the relative pronoun that refers back to these situations. We've got to say which. So unlike these situations, which are generally positive and easy to deal with, sitting in the train that's running late, So here we have to say which. We can't say that because of the type of relative clause that we're using in this sentence. If you remember, there are two types of relative clause. There are, let's see if I can remember now, non-definite or non-defined and defined relative clauses. And if you can't remember the rules for non-defined and defined relative clauses and which ones you can use, in which of those you can use that and which of those you can't use that, then please get onto Google, type in relative clauses, quickly swat up, and there's plenty of resources on the internet for that, and you'll know the difference. And it's important to remember because it's an easy mistake to make. When you're speaking, it doesn't really make that much difference, but when you're writing, it rather stands out if you get that wrong. So for number 6, we have to read the whole sentence with number 5 as well to get an idea of context. However, unlike these situations, which are generally positive and easy to deal with, sitting in the train that's running late, stuck in a traffic jam, or working to a tight deadline are much harder to manage, and so on. What we've got here is a list of things that's going on. So we've got sitting in a train, working to a tight deadline, and stuck in a traffic jam. Now we've got to pay attention to language patterns. And the language pattern that we've got to pay attention to is how each part of that list, so you've got 3 items in that list, how they all begin. And they all begin as gerund forms. So sitting and working. So to fit, the answer for number 6 has got to be also in a gerund form. Now this is an important writing technique that it's important if you're writing in the future in English and you're writing lists and you're writing lists in a way which all of the points of the list at the beginning of those points, if they all agree with each other in terms of case, so if they're all gerunds, if they're all present tense, if they're all future tense, if they begin all with the same preposition, etc., etc. If they all agree, then that makes it a much easier to read and much nicer to read. But when you've got a list which is higgledy-piggledy and you've got lots of different forms of grammar which start each individual point, then that list is a bit of a mess. It's not really good writing. So in this case, in order to fit with this list, we need a gerund form. But a gerund form of what? Stuck is an adjective. Stuck means that you're not moving anywhere. So the verb that we need to introduce adjectives is be. So the answer to this is being stuck in a traffic jam. Now for number 5, let me just write in which. And for number 6, let me type in being. So being stuck in a traffic jam or working to a tight deadline. Moving on to number 7. Stress is now recognized as a medical problem and as a significant factor, then we've got a gap, causing coronary heart disease. What do we need here? We need the correct preposition which collocates with factor. So what's the preposition that we need? And as a significant factor, in. Let me just organize the screen a little bit better so you can see over my shoulder. There we go. So stress is now recognized as a medical problem and as a significant factor, correct preposition, phrasal verb, a factor in causing coronary heart disease. Now, this is wonderful advanced language. If you can put this structure in your writing, use it in your speaking, this is wonderful advanced level English. A significant factor in plus gerund. So a significant factor in making something, a significant factor in succeeding in something, a significant factor in being able to meet someone, or whatever it might be. You can come up with a context for lots of different contexts. And it is a wonderful advanced language structure. If we move a little bit further on down, patients are often unwilling to admit to stress problems since they feel they are a form of social failure, and it's important that symptoms identified in order to avoid unnecessary suffering. Now, these kind of questions are always a gift because because these ones are based on understanding simple language patterns. What have we got after the gap? After the gap, we've got identified. Now, identified can be one of two things. It can either be an adjective or it can be the past participle of identify. Well, an adjective doesn't fit here, so that must mean it's the past participle of identify. Now, past participles are used in two language structures. I'm sure you'll remember. The first one is the perfect form. So I have identified. Or the second is in the passive form, where we need a form of the verb be before the past participle. So let's have a look at those. It is important that symptoms have been identified in order to avoid unnecessary sufferings. Doesn't work. We could say it's important that symptoms had been identified. It fits the gap in terms of grammatical sense. Whether that fits the context or not is a different question. So that leaves us with the correct form of the passive voice. It is important that symptoms are identified in order to avoid unnecessary suffering. So we've got simple identification of the passive voice, and that gives us our answer.